All right, we've seen how we can upload a protocol, create an element from it, and verify the health state. The next thing we should do is have a look how we can interpret that development itself. How will we, as maybe an investigator, know what the purpose is of this development? Let's have a look in Visual Studio, and of course we will be using DataMiner Integrations Studio as well, because this feature will make it quite easy for us to understand what's going on. Let's jump there. Now I have my Kubernetes manager open right now, so I always like the idea of looking at an existing development to better understand the structure before making a new one. And I also like to keep in mind what the idea was behind this development. So we wanted to receive information from an external data source, for instance, and make it available on screen. And in this case, I want to get the information on a regular timing base. So I will be looking for some kind of timer indication and somehow to display this information as well. Now remember, my Kubernetes manager had an HTTP session, so I need to define it somewhere that it will use an HTTP connection. So in my element creation, I will find this as well. Now I have my protocol open here, but I'm not going to scroll down through all of this definition just yet. I'm going to use DIS to help me navigate through it. Now, a nice window I always have open is the DIS tree, because instead of going and looking in the code behind, it gives me a nice structured overview of what's actually in there. Where do I find this tree? I go to DIS, Tool Windows, and select DIS Tree View. Now, the nice thing about this tree view is that when I click on something, it will jump in my definition and select the component I have selected in my tree. So when I would go to version, it will jump to version, and let's go to something completely different. We have timers here. Well, it will jump to the timers in my code as well. So this way I can easily have a look. This is my structure, what is in there in my definition. Now just read the tree as a human being. I'm not yet aware of all the code behind, all the definitions, the rules, the things I have to pay attention to. I'm just going to look at that tree. Remember, I've just created an element, and in there I had to select a name of a protocol. Even when I upload it, it will use my name of my protocol to indicate it in that protocol list. So I will need my name here as well. You can find it here on the top. I have a name Kubernetes manager. Another thing that was very important was that version. It's not just a name, I need a combination with a version. And you can find this in this tree as well. When I clicked on it, of course, it's in the same header section. So this is a header information linked to this protocol. Well, I'm not yet going to worry on all the other information in there, except I needed a means to identify that this is going to use an HTTP connection. And you can find it in this tree as well. You can see it's type HTTP. So DataMiner will look at this and know, well, I will need to show the properties of that HTTP connection whenever I'm going to create my element. So this is creating my element part. Now I also had the purpose. I want to retrieve information and I want it to be updated on a regular time. I actually already selected it before in my example, but let's just go over components. Relations will probably not be something with an iteration. So let's just move on. I see params. Well, yeah, maybe params is something I will need as well, not yet for the iterations, but params is actually the parameters I'm going to show on screen. So I will have my code behind here, and you can see I have something called RT display. Well, display makes sense to me and it's stated true, so I will display it somewhere. And actually I can see it has a position with a page general Remember, when we created our element, we had some data pages. I had a page general where I had some information, but I could also have different pages in there. So params is probably something that we will see quite often in our developments. Now let's go down a little bit in our DIS tree overview. We have quick actions, we have HTTP, triggers, groups, action, timers. Now, groups triggered something in my mind. You might remember we had a stream viewer, and in the stream viewer, we saw groups in there. Now, a group was a set of requests I'm going to send out. Could be one, could be multiple. It wouldn't make sense to have none in there, because then we're developing or defining we should do something, what will do nothing. So when we will click on the groups, you will find these are my to-dos. It's always nice to refer or remember groups as this is my to-do list. I would like to do something. I'm not yet doing it. I would like to do this. Why am I making this difference? Because there are some steps in the code behind, so in DataMiner process, to get there. I might say I want to retrieve information, but eventually my request needs to be sent out to that data source and I need something in return. So I might initiate that request, but it could take some time before I get my feedback. Groups, combination of things I would like to do. I have actions in here as well. I would like to do what? Well, something. In this case, in my example here, I have a group with an ID number 3. It's saying authorize. I have an action, and you can see so small comments in here as well. Action number 4 will authorize. It will set up my connection, make sure that I can log in. We can go down a little bit further and we can see here some timers. This is the item I was looking for. On a regular time, I want to retrieve my information so I can have my up-to-date info available. So in this case, I can see I have a name. It's a quite useful one because now I immediately know that this is a 5 minutes timer. It has some internal value, but I don't yet need to worry about it because my name is already saying that this value will represent my 5 minutes. And I have a content in here. Remember our groups, my to-do list. What do I want to do every 5 minutes? Well, it seems I want to do plenty of things. I have several groups in here as well. Could be it's one group, one to-do list, or I could have multiple to-do lists. Now, another thing I didn't mention yet about the creation of the element, we could also set some default values in that connection property. Now, where do we find this? Well, you see here, port settings, HTTP connection. So I can actually define my default value. In this case, we had bypass proxy as a bus address, and I didn't want people to change this. So I can enable the disabled option. So I can make sure that it's all grayed out, nobody can use it. Also remember, I had a default value in my IP port, and that one I can change. So when I go and have a look, I have an IP port here with a default value, and I could set disabled false or just leave it out in total. Now I don't want to add a lot of code that is unnecessary, so I'm not going to add that disabled option in here. Don't yet worry about the syntax. It's the goal that you understand what we're reading. So we want to know what's going on. Now, remember the purpose? We wanted to retrieve information on a regular time. I know I have repeated this for several times, and I will repeat it a lot of times because that's the core of this particular development. And that's something we should always keep in mind. What is the end goal of our development? Before you start coding, we really need to think about what are we going to do and what's the best way to approach this case. What are the corner cases? Maybe we will add something in the future and I can prepare something in the future, make it readable as well. So always think before you do something. Let's go and jump to that timer again. and have a look how we can navigate. How can we understand what this development is really doing? For this, I'm going to use a little feature in DIS, which makes it very handy to navigate through logic. Every component in here will have a little paperclip next to it. With this paperclip, I can have an overview what that component is actually doing. So we have an outgoing component and an incoming. Who initiated this item and what will it be doing? Now, a timer is a beginning step. So I can click on a group. Let's use the get nodes as an example. I'm going to click on the group, and as you can see, we will jump to that particular group, and it has that paperclip icon again. Now, in content of this group, I can see it has a session. Remember, I had an HTTP connection, so I will need a session to get my information. Now let's use that paperclip again to see what my outgoing items are and my incoming. Well, indeed, I expected my timer to be there, but there's also an action. I will park this in my mind. I want to follow my timer on a regular basis. I'm going to get information. I want to know how this is working, but I can see that there's an action as well. I will remember this one. Now let's go forward in our flow. The session, what is it doing? Let's click on the session, and we can see I have a connection set up. I have a request, and I will have my response. My response, again, you can see that there's some logic or structure in here. I have a content as well. Now my content links to a PID 505. Now PID, it stands for parameter ID, which one? 505. So the PID is my param ID. Again, I can use that paperclip to go to all the params linked to this specific session. We can also see the incoming components again. We have a group, and you can see another incoming, the token, because this is used in my header. Now let's use that content. I will receive my information, but I want to do something with it. I want to make sure that it's eventually displayed nicely. So let's use my 505. Let's click on the paperclip, go to the param 505, and I have a definition in here as well. Now remember, I just showed you a parameter which was displayed because I had an RT display true in there. This one, it's a lot less definition in there. It has a name, it has a description, it's indicating that it's a read component, so a variable. You can see it a little bit as a read-only component in other programming languages, and it is a textual setup. So whatever I'm going to receive, it could be a JSON file, for instance, or an XML format, or it could just be saying, hello world, we will push it in there. But I'm not seeing it. Now, the information that we're going to retrieve in this case is get node, so I will have a bunch of information. I want to translate it into something nice and readable. And most likely, this will be data that fits into a table. So I need to parse that information, put it in a table. And this is more complex logic. It's not that difficult, but it's not something I will define in clear steps of XML. And that's where quick actions come in. Now, quick actions have a whole different dimension, and we will have a separate session to explain everything about quick actions. But in this phase, I would consider this as my stop, my endpoint. I know this will parse the information and it will set it into a table. Now, of course, I can go and drill down to really know if this is what's going on. Again, that's why we will have a separate session all about quick actions. I will, however, quickly click on it so you have an idea how it looks like. I have a quick action ID. I can give it a nice name. It will be a piece of C# coding, so I'm quite free to do what I want in my logic. That makes it quite possible to insert whatever flow you would like to do. And this will be initiated, that's the trigger. This code, this small application basically that you're going to build will be initiated by something. And of course, we will have that paperclip again, where we can go back to our 505. Now remember that we had our action linked to it. So what will be going on there? Let's go back in our flow and we can go again. It's the same. I'm going this way so you can see it's the same as if you would have this bottom. You would want to know where does it come from? Who is it? Who is filling this in, or what is filling this in? You can use that paperclip again, check that session, and from that session you can again verify what's going on. And I'm just going to go back to my group. For instance, it could be that this session is used by a different group as well. So you initiate it via the timer. From the timer you go to a group. From a group you're going to the session, and on this session you will notice, well, hey, there's also another group running this. Maybe that's why I'm seeing a lot of updates, or I have too many requests going to my device. Something is wrong in my definition. I'm just reusing that same session in different groups while I should be requesting something else. Now let's go to the group, because it was a group who had a different action. So I'm going to go back using now this flow. I'm going on my action, and my action is going to say run this group. That's what I expected. Who initiated it? It's this trigger. Now what is this trigger saying? It's saying on my parameter, which one? Well, the one with ID 4. Soon as this changes, I want to run all of these actions. Why action? Well, it's saying type, and this is my content. Type action, I want to do all of this. Now I can already imagine that this will be a refresh button. Why? Well, the name says so. So your naming conventions, quite useful for other people to investigate what's going on, or make sure that your development is readable. So I can go and have a look. In this case, it's going to refresh multiple items. I can go and have a look who is initiating this. Well, it's a param, but what is this param? Let's go to the incoming, and we can see I have a param definition again. And again, it looks different from the two that we've already seen. In this case, I do have a name, no description. It is a writable component. It's displayed again somewhere on a page, and it's a button. I'm going to click on a button, and the button is going to be named on display. I'm going to see that it has the name refresh data. Internally, it's going to use the value 1, and that's why it's defined as a number. I'm just going to set number 1. Now you might say, why is it a writable? Well, I want to click on it. It's not a read-only. I want to make sure I have a change event, even when I'm setting the same value. I want to generate that change. And that's why as soon as I click on the button, it will jump to this trigger. It had a change event, so my param value changed, although the value itself didn't change. And it will start executing all of these groups. It will push all of my to-do list. This is stuff that you need to do. Send out these requests, send out this request, send out another request. And eventually I will get my updated information on my screen, because again, when I go to my action, let's use the get notes again, it will push that to-do list group. It's the same session, and we can go to that bottom again. So as soon as I receive information, it will go to my quick action to process the information, make sure it's displayed nicely.